a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Confucius. Confucius was a Chinese teacher, editor, politician, and philosopher of the spring and autumn period of Chinese history. The philosophy of Confucius, also known as Confucianism, emphasized personal and governmental morality, correctness of social relationships, justice and sincerity. His followers competed successfully with many other schools during the 100 schools of thought era, only to be suppressed in favor of the Legalists during the Qin Dynasty. Following the victory of Han over Chu after the collapse of Qin, Confucius' thoughts received official sanction and were further developed into a system known in the West as Neo-Confucianism, and later Neo-Confucianism. Confucius is traditionally credited with having authored or edited many of the Chinese classic texts, including all of the 5 classics. But modern scholars are cautious of attributing specific assertions to Confucius himself. Aphorisms concerning his teachings were compiled in the Analects, but only many years after his death. Confucius' principles have commonality with Chinese tradition and belief. He championed strong family loyalty, ancestor veneration, and respect of elders by their children and of husbands by their wives, recommending family as a basis for ideal government. He espoused the well-known principle, "Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself," the golden rule. He is also a traditional deity in Taoism. Throughout history, Confucius is widely considered as one of the most important and influential individuals in shaping the lives of humanity. His teaching and philosophy greatly impacted people around the world, and still remain in today's society. Name. The name, Confucius, is a Latinized form of the Mandarin Chinese, Confuzi, and was coined in the late 16th century by the early Jesuit missionaries to China. Confucius' clan name was Kong, and his given name was Chu. His capping name, given upon reaching adulthood and by which he would have been known to all but his older family members, was Zhongni, the Zhong, indicating that he was the second son in his family. Early life. It is thought that Confucius was born on September 28, 551 BC, in the district of Zhu near present-day Fu, China. The area was notionally controlled by the kings of Zhou, but effectively independent under the local lords of Lu. His father Konghe or Shulianghe was an elderly commandant of the local Lu garrison. His ancestry traced back through the dukes of Song to the Shang dynasty which had preceded the Zhou. Traditional accounts of Confucius' life relate that Konghe's grandfather had migrated the family from Song to Lu. Konghe died when Confucius was 3 years old, and Confucius was raised by his mother Yan's Hengzai in poverty. His mother would later die at less than 40 years of age. At age 19 he married Keegan, and a year later the couple had their first child, Kong Li. Keegan and Confucius would later have 2 daughters together, one of whom is thought to have died as a child. Confucius was educated at schools for commoners, where he studied and learned the 6 arts. Confucius was born into the class of Shi, between the aristocracy and the common people. He is said to have worked in various government jobs during his early 20s, and as a bookkeeper and a caretaker of sheep and horses, using the proceeds to give his mother a proper burial. When his mother died, Confucius is said to have mourned for 3 years, as was the tradition. Political career. In Confucius' time, the state of Lu was headed by a ruling ducal house. Under the duke were 3 aristocratic families, whose heads bore the title of Viscount and held hereditary positions in the Lu bureaucracy. The Ji family held the position, minister over the masses, who was also the prime minister. The Meng family held the position, minister of works. And the Shu family held the position, minister of war. In the winter of 505 BC, Yang Hu, a retainer of the Ji family, rose up in rebellion and seized power from the Ji family. However, by the summer of 501 BC, the 3 hereditary families had succeeded in expelling Yang Hu from Lu. By then, Confucius had built up a considerable reputation through his teachings, while the families came to see the value of proper conduct and righteousness, so they could achieve loyalty to a legitimate government. Thus, that year, Confucius came to be appointed to the minor position of governor of a town. Eventually, he rose to the position of minister of crime. Confucius desired to return the authority of the state to the duke by dismantling the fortifications of the city, strongholds belonging to the three families. This way, he could establish a centralized government. However, Confucius relied solely on diplomacy as he had no military authority himself. In 500 BC, Hao Fan, the governor of Hao, revolted against his lord of the Shu family. Although the Meng and Shu families unsuccessfully besieged Hao, a loyalist official rose up with the people of Hao and forced Hao Fan to flee to the Qi state. The situation may have been in favor for Confucius, as this likely made it possible for Confucius and his disciples to convince the aristocratic families to dismantle the fortifications of their cities. Eventually, after a year and a half, Confucius and his disciples succeeded in convincing the Shu family to raise the walls of Hao, the Ji family in raising the walls of Bai, and the Meng family in raising the walls of Cheng. First, the Shu family led an army towards their city Hao and tore down its walls in 498 BC. Soon thereafter, Gongshan Fo or Banyu, a retainer of the Ji family, revolted and took control of the forces at Bai. He immediately launched an attack and entered the capital Lu. Earlier, Gongshan had approached Confucius to join him, which Confucius considered, even though he disapproved the use of a violent revolution. The Ji family dominated the Lu state force for generations and had exiled the previous duke. Although he wanted the opportunity to put his principles into practice, Confucius gave up on this idea in the end. Creel states that, unlike the rebel Yang Hu before him, Gongshan may have sought to destroy the three hereditary families and restore the power of the duke. However, Dubs is of the view that Gongshan was encouraged by Viscount Ji Huan to invade the Lu capital in an attempt to avoid dismantling the Bai fortified walls. Whatever the situation may have been, Gongshan was considered an upright man who continued to defend the state of Lu, even after he was forced to flee. During the revolt by Gongshan, Zhongyu had managed to keep the duke and the three viscounts together at the court. Zhongyu was one of the disciples of Confucius, and Confucius had arranged for him to be given the position of governor by the Ji family. When Confucius heard of the raid, he requested that Viscount Ji Huan allow the duke and his court to retreat to a stronghold on his palace grounds. Thereafter, the heads of the three families and the duke retreated to the Jis palace complex and ascended the Wuxi terrace. Confucius ordered 2 officers to lead an assault against the rebels. At least one of the 2 officers was a retainer of the Ji family, but they were unable to refuse the orders while in the presence of the duke, viscounts, and court. The rebels were pursued and defeated at Gu. Immediately after the revolt was defeated, the Ji family razed the Bai city walls to the ground. The attackers retreated after realizing that they would have to become rebels against the state and their lord. Through Confucius' actions, the Bai officials had inadvertently revolted against their own lord, thus forcing Viscount Ji Huan's hand in having to dismantle the walls of Bai or confess to instigating the event by going against proper conduct and righteousness as an official. Dubs suggests that the incident brought to light Confucius' foresight, practical political ability, and insight into human character. When it was time to dismantle the city walls of the Meng family, the governor was reluctant to have his city walls torn down and convinced the head of the Meng family not to do so. The Zhuoshuan recalls that the governor advised against razing the walls to the ground as he said that it made Cheng vulnerable to the Qi state and caused the destruction of the Meng family. Even though Viscount Meng Yi gave his word not to interfere with an attempt, he went back on his earlier promise to dismantle the walls. Later in 498 BC, Duke Ding personally went with an army to lay siege to Cheng in an attempt to raze its walls to the ground, but he did not succeed. Thus, Confucius could not achieve the idealistic reforms that he wanted, including restoration of the legitimate rule of the duke. He had made powerful enemies within the state, especially with Viscount Ji Huan, due to his successes so far. According to accounts in the Zhuoshuan and Shiji, Confucius departed his homeland in 497 BC after his support for the failed attempt of dismantling the fortified city walls of the powerful Ji, Meng, and Shu families. He left the state of Lu without resigning, remaining in self-exile and unable to return as long as Viscount Ji Huan was alive. Exile. The Shiji stated that the neighboring Qi state was worried that Lu was becoming too powerful while Confucius was involved in the government of the Lu state. According to this account, Qi decided to sabotage Lu's reforms by sending 100 good horses and 80 beautiful dancing girls to the Duke of Lu. The Duke indulged himself in pleasure and did not attend to official duties for 3 days. Confucius was disappointed and resolved to leave Lu and seek better opportunities. Yet to leave at once would expose the misbehavior of the Duke and therefore bring public humiliation to the ruler Confucius was serving. Confucius therefore waited for the Duke to make a lesser mistake. Soon after, the Duke neglected to send to Confucius a portion of the sacrificial meat that was his due according to custom. And Confucius seized upon this pretext to leave both his post and the Lu state. After Confucius' resignation, he began a long journey or set of journeys around the principality states of northeast and central China including Wei, Song, Zheng, Cao, Chu, Qi, Chen, and Kai. At the courts of these states, he expounded his political beliefs, but did not see them implemented. Return home. According to the Zuo Xuan, Confucius returned home to his native Lu when he was 68, after he was invited to do so by Ji Kangxi, the chief minister of Lu. The Analects depict him spending his last years teaching 72 or 77 disciples and transmitting the old wisdom via a set of texts called the Five Classics. During his return, Confucius sometimes acted as an advisor to several government officials in Lu, including Ji Kangxi, on matters including governance and crime. Burdened by the loss of both his son and his favorite disciples, he died at the age of 71 or 72. He died from natural causes. Confucius was buried in Konglin Cemetery, which lies in the historical part of Fu in the Shandong province. The original tomb erected there in memory of Confucius on the bank of the Sishui River had the shape of an axe. In addition, it has a raised brick platform at the front of the memorial for offerings such as sandalwood, incense and fruit. Philosophy. Although Confucianism is often followed in a religious manner by the Chinese, many argue that its values are secular and that it is, therefore, less a religion than a secular morality. Proponents argue, however, that despite the secular nature of Confucianism's teachings, it is based on a worldview that is religious. Confucianism discusses elements of the afterlife and views concerning heaven, but it is relatively unconcerned with some spiritual matters often considered essential to religious thought, such as the nature of souls. However, Confucius is said to have believed in astrology, saying, "Heaven sends down its good or evil symbols and wise men act accordingly." In the Analects, Confucius presents himself as a transmitter who invented nothing. He puts the greatest emphasis on the importance of study, and it is the Chinese character for study that opens the text. Far from trying to build a systematic or formalist theory, he wanted his disciples to master and internalize older classics, so that their deep thought and thorough study would allow them to relate the moral problems of the present to past political events or the past expressions of commoners' feelings and noblemen's reflections. Ethics. One of the deepest teachings of Confucius may have been the superiority of personal exemplification over explicit rules of behavior. His moral teachings emphasized self-cultivation, emulation of moral exemplars, and the attainment of skilled judgment rather than knowledge of rules. Confucian ethics may, therefore, be considered a type of virtue ethics. His teachings rarely rely on reasoned argument and ethical ideals, and methods are conveyed indirectly, through allusion, innuendo, and even tautology. His teachings require examination and context to be understood. A good example is found in this famous anecdote. When the stables were burnt down, on returning from court Confucius said, "Was anyone hurt?" He did not ask about the horses, Analects X.11, 1013, or X17 by not asking about the horses. Confucius demonstrates that the sage values human beings over property. Readers are led to reflect on whether their response would follow Confucius, and to pursue self-improvement if it would not have. Confucius serves not as an all-powerful deity or a universally true set of abstract principles, but rather the ultimate model for others. For these reasons, according to many commentators, Confucius' teachings may be considered a Chinese example of humanism. One of his teachings was a variant of the Golden Rule, sometimes called the Silver Rule. Owing to its negative form, what you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. Zigong, a disciple, asked, "Is there any one word that could guide a person throughout life?" The master replied, "How about reciprocity? Never impose on others what you would not choose for yourself." Analects 15:24, tr. David Hinton often overlooked in Confucian ethics are the virtues to the self, sincerity and the cultivation of knowledge. Virtuous action towards others begins with virtuous and sincere thought, which begins with knowledge. A virtuous disposition without knowledge is susceptible to corruption, and virtuous action without sincerity is not true righteousness. Cultivating knowledge and sincerity is also important for one's own sake. The superior person loves learning for the sake of learning and righteousness for the sake of righteousness. The Confucian theory of ethics as exemplified in Li is based on three important conceptual aspects of life: ceremonies associated with sacrifice to ancestors and deities of various types, social and political institutions, and the etiquette of daily behavior. It was believed by some that Li originated from the heavens, but Confucius stressed the development of Li through the actions of sage leaders in human history. His discussions of Li seem to redefine the term to refer to all actions committed by a person to build the ideal society, rather than those simply conforming with canonical standards of ceremony. In the early Confucian tradition, Li was doing the proper thing at the proper time, balancing between maintaining existing norms to perpetuate an ethical social fabric, and violating them in order to accomplish ethical good. Training in the Li of past sages cultivates in people virtues that include ethical judgment about when Li must be adapted in light of situational contexts. In Confucianism, the concept of Li is closely related to Yi, which is based upon the idea of reciprocity. Yi can be translated as righteousness, though it may simply mean what is ethically best to do in a certain context. The term contrasts with action done out of self-interest. While pursuing one's own self-interest is not necessarily bad, one would be a better, more righteous person if one's life was based upon following a path designed to enhance the greater good. Thus an outcome of Yi is doing the right thing for the right reason. Just as action according to Li should be adapted to conform to the aspiration of adhering to Yi, so Yi is linked to the core value of Ren. Ren consists of 5 basic virtues: seriousness, generosity, sincerity, diligence and kindness. Ren is the virtue of perfectly fulfilling one's responsibilities toward others, most often translated as benevolence or humaneness. Translator Arthur Waley calls it goodness, and other translations that have been put forth include authoritativeness and selflessness. Confucius' moral system was based upon empathy and understanding others, rather than divinely ordained rules, to develop one's spontaneous responses of Ren so that these could guide action intuitively was even better than living by the rules of Yi. Confucius asserts that virtue is a mean between extremes. For example, the properly generous person gives the right amount, not too much and not too little. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?